Back in my teenage years, there were two of us who were inseparable, myself and my best friend Anthony. I was a quiet and introverted kid, always lost in games and daydreams. Anthony, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He was outgoing, adventurous, and always up for a good laugh. His infectious energy made him popular among our peers, and his house was the go-to place for hangouts. It was when I was 15 years old that this terrifying incident occurred. My best friend Anthony had invited me over for the night since his parents were away for the weekend. I remember cycling over to his place, parking my bike in his backyard, and entering through the back door. We indulged ourselves in a gaming marathon, playing everything from FIFA to Call of Duty. The floor was littered with popcorn and various junk food wrappers. As the evening wore on, we transitioned from gaming to watching a movie. However, the adrenaline from the games had left us too energetic to focus on the film. We fidgeted and laughed, unable to keep our concentration on the screen. It was the typical restlessness of young teenagers, eager for excitement and mischief. Well aware of this feeling, Anthony suggested, "Hey, let's make some prank calls." His eyes gleamed with anticipation, and I couldn't help but agree. So halfway through the movie, boredom struck, and we decided to act on Anthony's idea. It was around 10 o'clock. After Anthony made a few hilarious calls to pizza joints, leaving us in fits of laughter, it was my turn. I randomly dialed a few numbers, hoping to catch someone off guard. On my third or fourth try, I can't really remember, a man with a deep, rough voice answered saying, "Yeah?" instead of the usual hello. Anthony's laughter in the background made me lose my composure, and I burst into laughter. Regaining my focus, I tried to continue the prank, asking the man if I could borrow a wheel from his car. To my surprise, he responded by asking if my name was Anthony. Panic set in. How did he know Anthony's name? I quickly hung up. We looked at each other, both with wide eyes filled with fear and disbelief. In an attempt to make sense of the situation, we checked the phone settings and confirmed that the call was made anonymously, which made the situation even more unsettling. We tried to rationalize the situation, thinking maybe the caller ID somehow did display Anthony's dad's name, but nothing made sense. We even posted a question on Yahoo, seeking an explanation, but to no avail. As we settled back into the living room, some time passed. We tried to forget about the unsettling phone call, but every sound of the wind and every creak of the house made us feel uncomfortable. Then, at some point, we heard a soft knock at the door. We jumped in fear. Anthony walked to the peephole and turned around, saying, "There is no one there." He walked back, and as he did, we heard the knock again. Anthony rushed over to the door to look again through the peephole. There he saw a tall man, who in our frightened minds seemed to be 8 feet tall, though in reality he was probably closer to 5 feet. The man spoke. "I hear you behind the door, Anthony. I brought you a wheel from the car." He followed up with a question. "Is your dad home?" We stayed silent, not knowing what to do. We kept looking at each other. Then we heard loud footsteps walking around. And with a fear I had never felt before, we heard the back gate creak open. The man then went to the back door and tried to open it. That was the moment everything felt surreal. When I had entered his house earlier, we had totally forgotten to lock the door. So, Anthony and I rushed upstairs. There were no locks on the doors. We rushed to Anthony's room and hid under his bed. The intruder's footsteps grew louder as we heard him walk slowly upstairs. Our hearts raced and our breathing grew louder. We were shivering and shit scareless. Then we heard the man walking slowly towards Anthony's room. As he stood before the door, he waited. The silence was deafening, and then the door creaked open. We could hear him rummaging through the closet. The room went silent, and then the horrifying realization hit me. Anthony's breathing was too loud. I covered his mouth, praying the intruder wouldn't hear us. But as you could imagine, it was too late. Then suddenly a gut-wrenching scream pierced the silence. Anthony's legs were grabbed and dragged out from under the bed. In desperation, I grabbed a screwdriver from the nightstand and without a thought stabbed the intruder in the back. He released Anthony, and we seized the opportunity to escape. We ran away to the open backyard door and dashed into the woods behind Anthony's house, trying to put as much distance between us and the intruder. But the sound of crunching leaves behind us indicated he was in pursuit. We hid behind a bush, hoping he wouldn't find us. As we crouched there, I got a good look at the man. He bore an uncanny resemblance to Anthony's father, but there was something off about him. It was as if he was a cheap, crazed replica of Anthony's dad. We waited and heard the man walking slowly towards us. To our horror, he stopped just a few feet away, scanning the tree line. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. We made our way back to Anthony's house, locked all the doors, called the police, and afterwards Anthony's parents, explaining the whole thing. As I turned on the backyard lights, I caught a glimpse of the man standing near the woods, staring intently at the house. Then, after a few minutes, he vanished into the woods. That night remains a haunting memory for both of us. We never saw the intruder again, and the connection between the prank call and the break-in remains a mystery. Afterwards, I heard from Anthony that his father had a crazy half-brother who they hadn't seen in 10 years. He always wanted to be a part of the family, but he had a lot of mental issues and they were convinced it was better to let him have no part in their lives. It is still a mystery how this happens to a few prank calls. Then his dad said that a few months ago, he called him anonymously to catch up. But how he noticed we called him and how we dialed his number is still a mystery. We never made any prank calls again, and due to the events, our friendship went downhill. To be honest, I didn't mind it because when I think back to the experience, I still get chills and scary emotions from the horror event that happened. But one thing's for sure, that night changed our lives forever. Growing up as an only child, I was used to spending time alone. My parents often worked late, leaving me to fend for myself in our old, creaky house. At 17, I was old enough to look after myself, but that didn't mean the nights alone weren't eerie, especially during a storm. And one stormy night made my fears came true. I was home alone on a stormy night, the kind where the rain pours down like a waterfall and the winds howl like they're trying to get inside. I was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a cozy blanket, and watching TV, trying to distract myself from the storm outside. It's important to mention that when I was younger, a traumatic event occurred during a storm. The details of what happened aren't relevant to this story, but ever since then, every storm fills me with an extra sense of fear and paranoia. So, even before anything unusual happened that night, I was already on edge. I was watching TV, trying to ignore the storm outside by listening to the voices on the screen. The noise started faintly, a strange creaking sound coming from the upstairs bedroom. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks, or maybe the old house settling. Curious and slightly uneasy, I walked to the kitchen, which was directly below the bedroom, to get a better sense of what the noise could be. I stood there for a moment, listening intently but didn't hear anything. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind or the old house making noise. I went back to the living room, trying to pay attention to the TV and forget about the creepy sounds. But then, after about 30 minutes, the noise got louder and more constant. This time, it wasn't just creaking, it sounded like clear footsteps. A sense of unease settled over me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I decided to investigate, my heart pounding in my chest as I grabbed a flashlight. For those thinking, what an idiot for not turning on the lights, the flashlight was meant more as a makeshift weapon than for illumination. So armed with my flashlight, I made my way upstairs. Every step felt heavy, and my mind was racing with the worst possible thoughts of what it could be. I reached the bedroom door and opened it slowly, half expecting to find someone there. But the room was empty. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I decided to check the rest of the house, just to be sure. I stepped out of the bedroom and made my way to the bedroom next door, moving quietly and cautiously. The old wooden floor creaked under my weight, and I winced at every sound. The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. As I reached for the doorknob of the next bedroom, a loud creak echoed from the other side of the hallway. My heart stopped, and it felt like I jumped in the air. I quickly turned and took a right look down the hallway, and there I saw it. A tall man with long gray hair and an unkempt, unhealthy beard stood there, his eyes locked onto mine. The moment our eyes met felt like minutes, a silent standoff in the dimly lit hallway. Then, with a loud scream, the man rushed towards me, what sounded like a huge monster at that moment. Panic surged through me, and I quickly jumped back into the bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. In a frenzy, I pushed a closet or some sort of heavy furniture against the door, barricading myself in. The man was pounding on the door and screaming a chilling, wordless cry that echoed through the house. I was so in shock, my mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. The pounding and screaming continued, relentless and terrifying. And all I could do was press myself against the wall, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. I fumbled with my phone to call the police, my hands shaking as I dialed the emergency number. The man was already banging on the door, and I was terrified he would break in before help arrived. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and panic, and I could barely think straight. The woman on the other side of the line could hear the chaos unfolding in the background. She asked me if I had some sort of weapon in the room to defend myself. Her voice was shaky, and she seemed to be stuttering, as if this was the first time she had encountered a situation like this. She assured me that the police were on their way and would be there in 5 minutes. The man was still banging and screaming outside the door. The whole thing felt like an eternity before I heard the distant sound of sirens growing closer and closer. When they arrived, I screamed to the police.
"Break the front door. Help me."
The police responded swiftly, breaking the backyard window glass and rushing upstairs. They shouted, "Police, put your hands up where we can see them." But the man didn't listen. He kept going, his rage unabated. Then, I heard a loud struggle, the sounds of grunts and shouts filling the air. One of the policemen called out that it was safe now and that I could come outside. As I stepped out of the room, I saw an overwhelming number of police officers, and it took 4 of them to detain the man. As the police managed to subdue the intruder, I quickly fumbled with my phone again, this time to call my parents. My hands were shaking as I dialed their number, and as soon as I heard my mom's voice on the other end, a flood of emotions overwhelmed me. I tried to explain what had happened through choked sobs, and they immediately told me they were on their way. My parents arrived in what felt like no time, their faces pale and stricken with worry. They rushed to me, enveloping me in tight hugs, their own hands trembling. The relief of having them there was indescribable, and amidst the chaos, their presence was a grounding force. The police continued their investigation and shared more details about the intruder. It was revealed that the man had been on the run, having committed 2 other murders of women in the area. The news sent a fresh wave of horror through me and my parents. We were all left grappling with the realization of how close I had come to becoming his next victim. 5 years later, with the help of therapy and the unwavering support of my family, life had become more bearable. The memories of that night, however, were etched into my mind, and the trauma manifested itself in unexpected ways. Every stormy night brought back a flood of memories, and when alone, I found myself reliving the entire situation. The sound of rain against the windows and the howling of the wind would send my heart racing, and I would find myself back in that moment of terror.